Hello and welcome to our podcast. I'm Dani, and today Great.com talks with Lisa Matthews, the Policy and Campaigns Manager at Young Roots. If you haven't heard of it, the Young Roots works alongside young people and support them to improve their well-being and life chances. If you're new here to this podcast, remember to press subscribe on YouTube or in your podcast app. Oh, hi, Lisa. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. I'm eager to know more today about the work that you guys have been doing with young refugees, right? But let's begin with your history. I think Young Roots started in 2004. Is that right? So you have an anniversary coming. Is that
Yes,
correct?
this is our 20th anniversary year. Yeah, we're
That's a
celebrating this year.
that's amazing. And could you tell us about, how it happened and what motivated it?
So 20 years ago, it was set up as a much smaller organization, but still with the same principles, with the same mission, and that was to help young people who have had to leave their countries of origin, have had to leave their families because their countries aren't safe. And whilst the work over the years has taken place in projects in a few different places, the kind of core, the heart of the work has always been London in the UK. And that's where our work finds us today, working across three different projects in London, but encountering many of the same issues that refugees will find in other cities and other countries. But that 20 years has really given us a great deal of frontline experience, a kind of depth of knowledge of the quite unique challenges really that young people face, having to leave their homes and often being alone, separated, unaccompanied for the first time in their lives. And I think one of the things that makes Young Roots' work so special, and it has across the 20 years of our history, is that we don't just work with children and we don't just work with adults, we work with young people. So we work with young people from the ages of 11 to 25. And that's a period of enormous change for any young person. But of course, if you're not with your family, if you're encountering a new country, if you're trying to navigate complicated systems, then it's an incredibly important time. And I think Young Roots does an amazing job, really, of supporting young people, being alongside young people, working with young people, and creating, in some senses, a form of family, but definitely a form of community for those young people.
Oh, that's really beautiful to hear. And I think we had a guest a while ago here talking about this moment, this gap on the care that people usually have the chance to receive between ages of 11 and 25. It's really a formative, hugely formative moment, and sometimes people only go with up until the 18, or this mid of 16 to 20, early 20s. It's really somehow neglected. So it's good to see that you are able to offer this kind of care through the whole process. And since you mentioned the challenges, would you mind if we talked about it a little bit more? Because I think in the last years, uh, the whole refugee team kind of boomed, I would say, in mainstream media, especially with boards and everything else. But you have been working in this field, like Young Roots have been working with in this field for 20 years. You must have seen a lot of things. So what are the challenges that you most often see? How has this developed over time?
Well, over 20 years, there's been a lot of changes in the UK in how refugees are received and the kind of policies that affect their lives. Unfortunately, not for the better. Those changes have often made the lives of young people much, much harder. There's definitely been maybe an increased awareness of the fact that people have had to be fleeing war and persecution, but the fundamental reasons really haven't changed over 20 years. Maybe they're getting worse and being exacerbated by various kind of pressures and climate change. But becoming a refugee is not a choice. It's because you have to leave your home, your country, everything you know. I think it's quite hard to imagine really what that must feel like, either because of war or because of persecution. So people trying to harm you, trying to stop you accessing your rights, maybe even trying to kill you because of who you are or what you believe or what you do. So those kind of themes of why people have had to leave haven't changed that much over 20 years, but unfortunately people in those situations have come to the UK that has changed quite drastically over those 20 years. and the support for the kind of government support and the protections for refugees have been eroded a lot subsequent years and subsequent governments. And so we are there really to try and help pick up those pieces and to try and help young refugees be in the best situation they can to advocate for themselves, to rebuild their lives, and to try and survive, really. As I said, many of the young people we work with are alone, so they have had to separate from their families either on the journey or their families are still left behind. So they're alone, unaccompanied, separated in a country that's new to them, with systems that are totally new to them. And they're obviously desperately missing their family. They also need to try and get on with their lives because they don't know when they might see their family again. They don't know when it'll be safe to go back to their countries again. And what we've found is that a lot of the policies and laws that are in place make it really hard for children and young people to be treated as just children and young people and to feel like they're children and young people. They're always kind of forced into this position of their legal status, their legal definition of being an asylum seeker and a refugee, when really they're children, they're young people.
I honestly cannot even imagine like what it is like to live like this, to not have any, I would say, because if there is any when you arrive in a new country, it must be terrifying, and you have no support in anything, in language barriers, cultural disconnection. So it's something. And I think in your first answer, when I asked about history, you mentioned this take on creating communities, right? And I think that speaks a lot for the way that you address these challenges that we just talked about. So could you also guide us through it? How do you, what is your take on it? What is your angle? How do you work with this? And what are the programs that you're offering right now?
Young Roots has quite an interesting and holistic approach to supporting young people. It's very much developed with the needs of young people and with young people's voices feeding into the work of all of the organisation. And there's a few different strands of our work that come together in a whole picture. So we provide casework, one-to-one casework, where we help young people to access their rights and entitlements in things like housing, in things like education, which is always of such prime importance to young people. They're desperate to learn, they're desperate to carry on learning. Things like asylum support, which is the financial assistance and the asylum accommodation you can get if you are an adult through the government. And for children, they should be looked after by the local government, the local authority where they live. Sometimes there's issues about accessing that support, so the casework helps with that. Increasingly, our caseworkers are really, really trying to help young people to access lawyers, solicitors, free legal representatives, and this has become a huge crisis in Britain. There have been cuts to legal aid, which is the free legal advice that people without financial means are entitled to. And I have been working in this area myself for more than 15 years, and I've never seen it so difficult to find a lawyer, a solicitor to represent people. And this is children and adolescents who are trying to navigate an incredibly complicated and quite adversarial legal system, with the consequences of that going wrong being very severe if you're sent back to your country where it's not safe. And it's becoming almost impossible to find legal representatives for people in this system. And many may have a named legal representative, but that legal representative doesn't have capacity to actually take much action on their cases. And there has also been a very large backlog of asylum claims in the UK. It reached 175,000 cases last year because the Home Office, the department of the government that decide asylum cases, were under-resourced and were not making decisions on these cases. So a lot of people have become very stuck in this asylum process, but without a lawyer and without knowing what their rights are and what they have to do. And then I say a combination of these factors and the policies that we've seen brought in that have made the housing and accommodation situation a lot worse for young people and all asylum seekers in the UK. The kind of access to services that people need, we've seen that actually the mental health of the young people we work with is really deteriorating, and the amount of support and services available are also diminishing. And so a lot of the caseworkers' roles are around trying to help young people access that absolutely vital support they need, because they've already been through extremely traumatic processes of getting to the UK and their experiences in their home country. So it's a hard job being a caseworker, but it's an amazing thing to see the dedication and passion of the caseworkers at Young Roots. They're increasingly having to deal with a new crisis here of refugee homelessness, which is when people are actually granted refugee status, their needs, their protections recognised by the state, they're very, very quickly evicted from their asylum accommodation that they have until then been entitled to. And we've seen young people being forced to sleep on the streets. And this has even been happening throughout the winter period with sub-zero temperatures. So the caseworkers have been working hours and hours and hours to try and make sure that this doesn't happen to the young people we're working with. And alongside that casework, which is obviously a hugely important part of the work, we also do youth work and youth activities. And these are a really important kind of complementing element. And the youth work we do, it's incredibly youth-centered. It's very much about youth participation. And the aim of that youth work, which can be one-to-one, but is often around youth activities and groups. So we run youth clubs, we run trips, we run activities, we run sports, English classes. That's to help reduce the isolation of the young people and to support their well-being. So young people often feel quite apart from their peers. They're often in these former hotels as a form of accommodation. It's very hard to build up any kind of community network within that. And I think of equal importance, these youth activities, because they're so based on what young people want and what young people need and directly say, it's a way of forming that community that you mentioned. And it's about allowing young people to build a voice together and really importantly, to make decisions about their own lives. Even if that's just which trip do you want to do this summer, there's so many elements of their lives where they're not given any choice or given any agency that we're really trying to build that back into young people's lives at Young Roots.
Wow. I wow. I'm sorry. I'm kind of in awe here because I keep wondering the size of the structure you need to have. Because what you presented to us is like one very objective thing that you need to solve related to, you know, their rights, having a lawyer, having access to the judicial system, but also, the subjective other side that is taking care of their mental health. And it's really a complex thing, right? It's a balance between the two things and have all of these things moving. So I'm kind of in awe here and also wondering, you must have faced a lot of challenges to keep this structure running. I mean, how it sounds quite big, to be frank with you. It sounds something really, really robust, at least I would say.
I think the approach that Young Roots has, because it is holistic, it is difficult to maintain. I think sometimes in the charity sector, organizations and funders are really pushed to try and just do as much as possible, see as many young people as possible, see as many clients, as some people term it, as possible. And we've really found at Young Roots that while we do need to be a decent size because there is so much need, because there are so many young people who are let down by other services, we are having to do more with young people in more and more difficult situations. But that kind of depth of support, that really getting to know young people and being trusted by young people is so important. And I think that's why the casework and the youth work so well together. But it's a valid point, and I think it's one of the reasons why my role was brought in and why my area of work has been brought in very recently to this picture at Young Roots. So I work on policy and campaigns, and that's been developed. It's a very small area of our work so far. We've always been about frontline delivery, but that's come about through that 20 years of experience of seeing just how much the laws, policies, and practices that were in place negatively impact on the young people we're working with, and that we can't help people to access their rights and entitlements if more and more barriers are put in place to them accessing those rights and entitlements. So my role is about working with the young people that we support and working with our staff to inform what we need to be trying to work to change for the better and how we should be doing that. And that's so that young people are in a better situation, are more able to thrive, are more able to rebuild their lives, are more able to get the rights and protections they deserve, but also so that all of us working with young people can manage to carry on that work when we're facing such difficult situations. If a young person is in distress, is facing homelessness, that can take its toll on you as an individual as well. And it's important to feel like what we're bearing witness to is part of making the situation better for all young people, all refugees.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And for just a quick pause here to tell people listening or watching us on YouTube right now to check your page, right? Because, we touched based on topics here, Lisa introduced us to the programs, but you can get much more information at the webpage, which is youngroots.org.uk, right? So check there and get in touch with them. We're going to cover that bit in a second. But before I want to ask you, Lisa, we were talking about the challenges, and you mentioned that this role that you're in right now is something quite new. But thinking of this novelties, and thinking about what you see for your future, what do you think are the next steps for Young Roots for the next few years there to come?
I think that the future is going to involve a lot more campaigning and developing that area of our work. I wish that weren't the case. I wish that the system for young people was better, but we're going to need to work together to make that the case. We're seeing some very, very worrying laws in the UK, including one that would actually stop people being able to claim asylum altogether. So that's definitely the so-called Illegal Migration Act is going to be a big focus of our activities. We're going to be thinking a lot about community because one of the consequences of the policies at the moment is that young people, asylum seekers, refugees are housed and are kind of moved out of the community, and people aren't seen as neighbours and members of the community when actually we can all be living side by side and working together and getting to know each other. And I also think we'll be doing more and more with young people leading what we're doing. That's a really important element of our work. And I think that's something that's going to become much stronger at the organization, that young people are directly involved in so much of what we're doing. And that we really cherish and celebrate some of the amazing things I see at the youth club, at the youth activities, where you see young people making friends with each other from different countries, from different backgrounds, welcoming in new members to the youth club and supporting each other and creating that amazing community in the face of such difficult situations where these beautiful relationships, friendships can grow, but also then they can help support each other through these times and also ask for things to be better for them and for everybody else.
Well, I think that whenever young people get involved with, helping out each other, it's usually a good sign for the future, right? So I do,
Definitely.
I do hope your vision is fully correct on that bit. Absolutely. I think this is how we really change like society, right? When we understand from, a young age that we all belong in the same space. So it's something vital, I would say. But taking this vision of yours, when thinking about the campaigning that you mentioned, I really want to know now, what are the best ways for listeners help you guys out, help you keep moving forward?
Well, as you say, that sounds like we're trying to do a lot for a lot of young people, and we are. And the way that we work, this kind of intensive, very supportive, trusting way we work with young people, does require a lot of people involved with that work, and that does cost money. So the kind of short answer is really we could do with all of the donations that are possible because our work is becoming more and more needed. There are more and more young people who need our support, and we don't want to have to provide a lesser quality to support the young people because we know how effective and how important in these very disrupted lives, these very important close relationships the young people are. And we want to be able to protect those relationships and make sure that we can carry on being there for young people in the future.
That's awesome. And I do hope people use your page to get involved and donate as much as they can, because this is a highly important cause, I would say. And it's beautiful to see your approach. So thank you so much, Lisa, for guiding us through that today. And this was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
And for everyone else that got with us for one more episode, thank you so much. And well, remember, if you enjoyed this episode, press subscribe on YouTube or in your podcast app, because that shows the algorithms that this is an important conversation and more people can learn about the importance of young roots. Check their page, help if you can, and I see you in the next episode.